All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's study session for the City of Casa Grande. And on our agenda tonight is a presentation from our Community Services Department on our master plan. So our Community Services Director, Dave?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have a lot of great information to present to you tonight. So without further ado, I'll introduce Mike Svets of Pros Consulting, who will lead the discussion.
Great. Mayor, Council, thanks much. As Steve said, there is a lot of information to go through, so I'll cut right to the chase and say this is really going to be about the community engagement that we went through in the last 5-6 months. A lot of the information, detailed information, is going to focus on the statistically valid survey, which is a random sampling of your community. So, as we said, kind of the first thing we teed up was focus group stakeholder interviews and the website. We engaged staff, members of the community, movers and shakers in your community that are really kind of in tune with parks and recreation and library services to really give us an understanding of just kind of what were the general themes associated with it. So kind of what came up was trails, and more trails. Swimming pools, both indoor and outdoor, BMX park, riparian preserve, natural areas. Those were kind of the amenities that kind of popped up during those conversations. Some other key themes were taking care of what you already have while anticipating the growth that's coming to your community. There is a connection, and a strong connection desired between community services and economic development. It is one of those kind of pillars of your community that not necessarily drive business, so to speak, but it can drive people choosing to move here. So you do have expansion of some larger businesses coming to your community, and those employers and the employees of those businesses have a choice on where they could live. And people recognize that community services is one of those things that people think about when they choose to make a decision on where they're going to live. And then, as always, financial sustainability is always a concern, being able to maintain and grow at the same time. We did a virtual community meeting shortly after we were here in February. We did end up with 40 attendees. As part of that, we had 39 different questions with a lot of different themes associated with those. All of those were responded to in writing. So everybody that registered for the meeting received the document directly, and then everything else was posted on the project website. So speaking of, we've had some pretty good engagement. I'm not going to list each and every 114 comments, but the things here in this word cloud give you a pretty good understanding of the things that kind of came up. So the mountain parks were important, BMX tracks, swimming pools, trails. You can see those repeated quite a bit here. And I think there was one moment where I think we received 20, 30 different comments for a BMX track all in one night. So not surprising, but again, it's giving people an opportunity to have their voices heard. And of course, that does factor into our decisions, strategic decisions that'll come. So from a community surveys perspective, we really kind of did 3 different kind of surveys. So the first one was the Intercept Surveys. This was a dotocracy exercise, a lot of pictures, a lot of opportunities for people to just take 3 dots and put them where they felt were most important to them. 2 events, the Bunny Hop Walk event and the Public Safety Day, were manned booths as part of those events. And then we also had the boards and the dots available at the both libraries and the recreation center throughout the entire month of April. So again, a lot of opportunities for folks to engage this way. A lot of different topics, but you can look at the libraries, and it's really about programs, physical collection, makerspace, again, programs, and of course computers. The park and rec topics were really around pools, playgrounds, diamond fields, indoor, outdoor, exercise, fitness equipment, and trails was pretty prominent as well. So again, it just gave people an opportunity to really have their opinions voiced, but in a way in which it was easy and they didn't have to feel like they had to get into a discussion with folks. We also did two surveys. We did an online survey. This was administered completely online. It was administered in both English and Spanish, and we did this in May and June. We did this following the statistically valid survey, and we ended up with 356 households responding to that. So it was a really good turnout, especially given the fact that we were transitioning from kids in school to kids out of school and spring to fall. Now, I'm not going to run through every last detailed question, but these were the high priority program and service areas that came out of the online survey. So this was a survey in which anybody could take it, and they could potentially take it multiple times. But I think you'll see as we go through both the online survey and the statistically valid survey, a lot of commonality. So the active aging program activities, you have a senior center, you have two areas of your community that are older than your population as a whole, west of Pinal and south of Florence. And we really kind of wanted to hone in on those kind of programs. And what we saw was day trips, special interest classes, things related to health, and wellness, and even volunteer opportunities. So not really surprising there. From a general recreation program activities, community events, wellness, cooking classes, and art, dance, and performing arts. Those are all over the place, right? None of those are the same. And then library services, this is about books and computers. And so that's not necessarily surprising either. When we look at park facility and amenities, you will see here trails, and pools. And then you get into some, what I would call a little bit more specialty, special interest, but dog parks, BMX tracks, indoor fitness equipment. So again, these were the high priority areas that came out of the online survey. The statistically valid survey, so this is the one that was a random sampling of your community. It was administered by ETC Institute on our behalf. The survey was done and developed in partnership with the city, and this survey really needs to match up with your demographics, and it has to match up with where people live in your community. So 7% of your households in Casa Grande are Spanish speaking, and we hit 5% of those households, which is really strong from that perspective, and definitely a request that was made by Councilmember Fitzgibbons at the meeting in February. So we were able to achieve 390 completed surveys. The goal was 300, so almost 25% or almost 33% more than what our goal was. So this is an indication of the survey response location map. So obviously in areas where people don't live, you don't see any dots. But in the areas where you have most of your residential areas clustered in your community is where the dots were, where the surveys were returned. Also, to kind of take it a step further, in the areas where you have most of your dense population is also where you have higher clusters of dots, dots closer together. So combined with the demographic information that we got from the survey, the Spanish-speaking population, and also the geography of your community, we feel very comfortable that these results, represent a good cross-section of your community. So I've broken this up into a few sections. The first one is advocacy. So what you'll see here is the strongly agree and agree with these statements are in the blue. So this is basically asking the community, do you agree with these benefits of community services in Casa Grande? You see fairly decent numbers around strongly agree or agree, and you have a lot of folks that are neutral that just maybe don't necessarily have a strong opinion one way or the other. This kind of indicates to me that there's a little bit of education that needs to go on regarding the benefits of the community services in Casa Grande. On the flip side, there's not a lot of red. So there's not a lot of people saying that they disagree or strongly disagree with these statements. There is some work to be done here with regards to just educating the community about how important community services and the things that they can do for them. Not about going to play soccer, not going about, swimming, but how does it really add to the quote unquote quality of your life in a lot of different ways. Regarding level of satisfaction for library services, now this is where you see a lot of blue. And a lot of strong support for, very satisfied and satisfied with all of the different things that the library provides. The neutral is probably an indication that folks just, don't necessarily have an opinion one way or the other. But again, very, very, very little red, meaning, not a lot of dissatisfaction or very dissatisfied. Facility utilization and barriers. So you're going to see a lot of red, but let me explain. So this is facility usage. So the dark red is folks never using any one of these amenities provided or services provided. But I'll give you a very couple quick examples. The community recreation center. Yes, 65% of your community never use that. But we as a consulting firm do feasibility studies for recreation centers all the time. Target market for regular use is somewhere around 20 to 25%. And you're right at that number. So I don't want you to get hung up too much on a lot of red. Even other city-owned parks, that is probably an area where you have some significant improvement to be made, because normally we would be seeing 78% of the community, 80% of the community using parks. So you have opportunities there. Again, I don't want you to get too hung up, but again, when you look at aquatic centers or golf or even the senior center, you would expect a lot of red on that screen just simply because it's a special use or tied to a special age group. In terms of barriers, though, to usage, again, I do not know what is offered was number one. Programs offered do not interest me as number two. Park facility amenities do not interest me. This kind of ties back to lack of or the low numbers regarding park usage, and I don't need what is offered. So we typically see these, but they speak to how do we overcome or how do we increase utilization, and what are the barriers that your community sees. And again, this is really strong information for us as we move into the next phase of the project. So library services, what's most important to the community? Books, and books, 3 of the top 4, not surprising. And then what's really interesting is courteousness of staff and cleanliness of facilities. Those are 2 of the top 5 things that are most important to your community when it comes to libraries. And then you get into what I would call a little bit things that are a little bit more specialty. But again, this aligns with what we heard in the online survey. In terms of facility and amenity needs. So I'm going to walk this through you in a way that what's most important, what unmet needs are, and then how do we prioritize this. So as not surprising, walking and biking trails were number 1, and then indoor walking tracks were 2, urban trails were 3, dog parks were 4, mountain hiking, bike trails were 5. So 4 of the top 5 things that are most important to your community align with what is the most important or the most participated activity in Casa Grande, in Arizona, across the country, which is walking for exercise. So it's not surprising that trails come up as much as it does, but then again, it really starts to point us in a really good direction. So what do people need more of? Trails, walking tracks, trails. So it's important to, it's one thing to say something's needed and important, but it's another thing to know whether or not you're meeting the needs. And so when you start to see alignment between importance and unmet needs, it makes the prioritization really, really easy. So the high priority areas are basically, as of today, if your population didn't change in the next 15 years, you would want to expand on these amenities. The medium priority kind of means that things are right-sized for your population, but if you grow, you're still going to need to grow them commensurate with your population. The third is the low priority, is where we start to really get into specialty areas, sport fields, splash pads, diamond fields, golf, basketball courts. They're very niche kind of activities, but it doesn't mean that you don't do them. It just means that you're not going to have athletic fields everywhere. You're not going to have skate parks everywhere. You're going to strategically invest. And even though these are a low priority, your population's going to grow, so you're going to have to continue to strategically expand these areas as well. So same exercise for recreation programs. Top two, actually they're really, really close to the online survey as well, but top two, community events, fitness and wellness, cooking classes, top three in the online survey, top three in terms of most important to folks. And then you get into volunteer programs and art, dance, performing arts. One thing to point out, even though you see things with really small percentages, every percent of your community is about 500 people. So though we're talking about 3% for skate park programs are most important, that's still 1,500 people. So I don't want you to get too hung up on the percentages, because when you start to look at it in terms of numbers of population and people, it starts to put things into perspective. In terms of unmet needs, almost the exact same. Free, low-cost community events, fitness and wellness classes, outdoor trips, cooking classes. So again, alignment, this is where you see a greater need to expand your programming, and this is the stuff that community services puts out. You want people to engage, whether that be through staff-directed programs or third-party contractors. This is the area that you folks are really most interested in expanding your programs today, or shall I say yesterday. The medium, again, same kind of exercise. You're going to grow those with commensurate with your population. Low priority, again, very specialty and or age specific. You're not going to do these everywhere, but yet at the same time as your population grows, you're going to grow these programs in relationship to that. The big takeaway with regards to low priority programs and the facilities and amenities is, if you're not doing it now, don't spend any resources doing it. So it's just, you can't be everything to everybody because you just don't have the resources. So if there's something that is on the list that's in low priority and you're not doing it now, don't spend the resources to do it in the future. This kind of takes out the squeaky wheel, the one or two or three people that want something very, very specific, but you just don't have the resources to do everything for everybody. So active aging needs, again, this is where you start to see not a clear, huge jump in terms of what's most important. Kind of have about 7 or 8 there that run from 22% to 12%, and they're a little bit different. Day trips to health screenings, healthy opportunities, computers, special interest classes. In terms of unmet needs, again, a very good alignment between what's important and what they want you to do more of. And then priorities, one big takeaway here is there's only 2 things in the low priority column. So there are a lot of opportunities in a lot of different, what I'll call core program areas from a senior perspective, that are really important to your community. And you have an opportunity to invest in your senior population in a lot of different ways. I think it's just important to recognize this, and how does this translate to the senior center, and what the senior center can actually do is another conversation that we'll have as we get into the conversation a little bit further. So from a community support perspective, this is where I think you have opportunities to build on. So we talked about the benefits, and people maybe not necessarily recognizing the benefits of community services. But this is where you start to say, all right, well, what are the things that you can do as a city in community services that will improve, my life? And so this is where you see a lot of blue, very supportive and somewhat supportive. It takes you to get all the way down to the very, very, very second to last bottom for you to be below 50% of very supportive or somewhat supportive. So develop a new skate bike park, 47% of your community are very supportive, somewhat supportive. Expand archery range, 16%, 17%. But when you look at the top, one of the things that just really jumps out at me is, without running through the entire list, is it's about taking care of what you already have, reinvesting in your existing system, and trails. Those are the big takeaways in terms of what people are most supportive of. In terms of highest priority needs, this is not going to surprise you, but again, library services are about books and computers. Recreation programs, you have, again, special interests, trips, fitness, wellness, community events, education classes, and then, of course, the greatest amount of area of focus for programming is really on the active aging. And again, that ranges from classes to health to day trips and volunteer opportunities. In terms of park facility and amenities, again, this is taking all of the information and putting it all into one big pot and saying, all right, what are your high priorities? Trails, pools, dog parks, and community garden. I mean, that's really what this says. In terms of breaking this down by planning area, so you have different people that live in the 3 different areas of your community. So we wanted to say, all right, well, this is what the community as a whole said. But is there any differences between where people live in your community based on the planning areas? So the demographics are simply this, and these are demographic projections for 2037. Most of your community lives east of Pinal, north of Florence Boulevard, and that is still going to be the case 15 years from now. South of Florence is 16%, west of Pinal is 20%. But you have very different age segments. The race, as much as maybe there's a perception that it's significantly different across your community, it's not. You still are projected to have, white being the majority of your population, though reducing over time, and large Hispanic population across your entire community. The differences are really the age segmentation and income levels. So your age segmentation, you're younger and have a very balanced age segmentation in east of Pinal, north of Florence, but south of Florence and west of Pinal is where you have an aging population. South of Florence is aging more significantly than even west of Pinal. And then, of course, the income levels, a little bit more affluent in the east of Pinal, north of Florence, and then less affluent south of Florence and west of Pinal. That said, what are the differences? So library services, these are your high priorities. So the high priority services are the first column. The dots indicate if it was a high priority or not citywide, just looking at it through the lens of what's highest priority. They're the exact same regardless of where people live in your community. From a program and service perspective, a little bit different, but still a lot of alignment with the high priority program and service areas. You might be surprised to see that golf programs somehow, some way jumped up on the screen in terms of a high priority for south of Florence Boulevard, but that's what the survey kind of indicated to us. But I think it's important to recognize that's a really small percentage of the population living there. In terms of, oops, I went too fast. In terms of active aging programs, again, a lot of commonalities, and this is where the big takeaway for me was that east of Pinal, north of Florence is your younger area of your community, but I think they recognize that there's a value to providing these kind of programs and services as your community gets older. In south of Florence and west of Pinal, where folks are older in your community, their needs are smaller, but they're still in alignment with the rest of your community. So we recognize that your senior center is right across the street, and we recognize that that is likely serving a big portion of south of Florence and west of Pinal. If you're going to focus on your older communities, older areas of your communities, your really strong focus is going to be on what you see in south of Florence and west of Pinal. And then park facility and amenities, very similar across all areas of your community. The only thing that really jumped up that wasn't citywide was outdoor large event space and amphitheaters, and that was for west of Pinal. So again, a lot of continuity in terms of the needs of your community, regardless of where people live, regardless of age, race, income levels. So how do we use all of this information? This is not the end-all be-all. We're not going to draw all of our conclusions just from this. But, we start to move in a direction of what's called a level of service methodology. And really what this is how do we right-size your programs and services, your parks, facilities, and amenities to your community? There's a lot of different variables and factors that go into doing this. Prioritization of community need is certainly high on the list, but it's not the end-all be-all. Such things as your population growing, such things as there a need to take care of what you have first versus expand. Such things as the fact that you're going to have a lot of new people move into your community that don't live here now, whose voice is not reflected in the survey results. We have to take those trends into consideration based on what your population growth looks like. And then, of course, financial sustainability. So our next steps, we are going to do a virtual community meeting, very similar presentation on July 14th at 6. And the rest of this is really technical. But I think one of the big takeaways, and I'm glad that it's included in the scope of work, is given the high demand and priorities placed on trails, we're going to be doing a connectivity analysis. So taking your existing trails master plan and really starting to prioritize that as part of this, that creates a really strong action plan in terms of investing in your trails going forward. Questions, concerns, comments, suggestions? A lot of information, but
No, it's good, thank you. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Thank you, and I was looking over those charts. You're a demographer as well, it seems, and a statistician. But I'm glad you explained them, it helped a lot. The one thing I noticed, I was wondering is, do you, or can you speak to the fact that people want these amenities, trails, mountain bike trails, just those, and we do have them. So do the people know that are taking the survey, do they know what's available already?
And I think that's where understanding the utilization factor is part and parcel to, and people saying one of the barriers is I don't know what's offered.
Right.
So again, there's an education here. It's a marketing thing, right? And I didn't bore you with some details of other questions that we asked about how people learn versus how they would prefer to learn. But those are a little bit out of alignment. And so it gives you some really strong information in terms of if you're going to invest in a marketing education around what community services has, how are you going to do it? Because again, you only have so many resources to do that with. So that information will be a part of a way to help address the lack of utilization, lack of awareness, and still people kind of indicating they have a strong need and unmet need.
And it's neat to see the trails because we're getting very big on that, and we have the master plan, which you're going to incorporate.
Yes.
And then another neat thing I thought is people wanting to take pride and take care of what we have, because that's more of a low-hanging fruit to me. Since we already have it, we don't have to make a huge capital investment to do it again, but we make a smaller investment to maintain it, clean it up, put some better amenities there. Bathrooms, I think, was one of them. And then, because as we build more amenities, of course, that maintenance cost goes up every year, right, Steve? The budget just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So, which we're gonna need to, but as the population grows. But I really like how you interpreted that for us, so I wanna thank you, and that was a really good thing, is we need to do a little more advertising for the people that aren't utilizing what we have, because we do have some great amenities already, and if we can get more people to use them, then we can.
For a
do more as
community
well.
of your size, you have an incredible park and recreation community services system. You really do. But it's the old broken window theory, right? If you don't take care of that, things start to get used for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
It's
and
about activation and utilization and making those parks and facilities
And
productive.
we're always challenged with trying to find ways to communicate, right? To communicate out to our constituents, to the citizens. And that's really, today, one of the single biggest challenges we have, is how do you get that information out? How do you get the word out to people so they know what you have? Because every time I sit down with somebody and they go, well, what about this? What about that? And then I, rattle off all the things that we have and the places to go. And they go, well, I didn't know that. Well, I didn't know that. It was like,
That was my big
it's
question,
like,
I didn't know about.
just hit me in the head. It's like, we really are struggling to try and figure out how to get that message out there. And obviously, the dispatch helps us with that, but there's only so much they can do. People get their information in so many different ways today. It's just very, very difficult. And the city is not a good marketer. It's not a good marketer. Okay, so we need to be better at it. We're going to try. We're working on it, but it doesn't happen overnight.
And I think the results of that one question, how people prefer to learn, I don't think that's necessarily just applicable to community services. I think that's very applicable to your city as a whole.
Yeah, that'd be interesting information as well. Donna?
Well, I sat in on the virtual, the first one, and you guys did such a good job, and I think the questions that were asked were very pertinent to what people were thinking.
Yeah.
And so I applaud you on that. Some of the things I walked away from this is when I was looking at it, you were talking about the priorities, some of the priorities that we saw, and talked about, health information, counseling, those kind of things. I don't think that we have to invent those. I think that we have to really do a good job at educating with our partners that are doing that within the city. And we have a lot of the things that they listed that I could just name off, nonprofits and businesses that offer things like that.
Right.
So it's not that we have to do all of that.
Right.
So I think that the volunteer opportunities is a great way for us to look at how we can engage more people in our community, not just on boards and commissions, but how they want to get involved, and try to pair them up with, if not us, who. And that, to me, those are low-hanging fruit that's going to be really easy to do.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Bob?
We have a GO bond issue coming up later in the year, and this is probably for Larry. I was curious, how are we going to tie this in to the GO bond? The GO bond calls for $37 million to be directed towards
Trails and
parks and
parks.
recreation, land and improvements. How are we going to, are we going to use this, and in what way?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Huddleston, from my perspective, the way that we would actually utilize this data is really bringing some specificity into the actual allocation of the funding. As the mayor and council is aware, trails are pretty self-explanatory when you're going to construct a trail, but as an example, we can begin to take through this continuity map, begin to actually allocate the revenue or the bond proceeds to those types of projects, specific type projects. When you look at the bond questions, they're somewhat broad in the standpoint of covering specific parks. Again, the data that we're collecting today essentially will allow us to better allocate the money that we actually are if the voters approve it, will actually better allow us to allocate those funds.
And we can use this, like, for example, Paul Mason Sports Complex, right? We have 130 acres there of undeveloped land, and that's part of the bond, GEO bond. So now, maybe, to your point, more specificity in terms of exactly what that might look like in terms of trails that are included into it. Maybe there's a bike park or whatever, dog park, additional dog park. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that we can use this for.
Absolutely, Mayor. And in fact, we anticipated that the timing, obviously, if we would have had this data and the master plan completed prior to engaging the mayor and council on the general obligation bonds, we could have provided that level of specificity. But essentially from a timing perspective, I believe that we'll be able to really add the specific amenities that we learn through this process into those programs.
Yeah, it just helps our strategic plan when it comes to the park system. Mr. Lavender, did you have anything? Lisa, did you have any comments?
I actually do, thank you, and happy 4th of July, everyone. But no, I just wanted to say, what a great presentation. I'm just really impressed with just the whole, the results, as far as including the demographic and especially the geographical piece of it, I think is really important for us. I like the heat maps where you're showing where the populations are. And thank you so much for continuing with my concern with the Spanish language, our Spanish population. But no, great input. I think this is obviously something that we're going to be able to use in years and years to come. But I think, like you said, obviously, it's good to see that where we are focusing a lot of our time is what it is important to people, especially the trails and the parks. But I think one of the key points you talked about was also planning for the future and new residents that are coming to Casa Grande. And I think that's going to be important, especially as we see new employers, coming and different people moving to our community. So that's going to be key on top of all of this. So, but no, again, great presentation. Thank you so much for all of your time and input. And I was happy to see so many people participated in the surveys and everything. So great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Steve, do you have any closing comments? Okay. If no one else has anything else, then thank you very much for the presentation. Very educational.
Thank
and I
you.
look forward to the 14th, July 14th.
You got it.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock virtual. You got
And
it.
it's on our website if you want to, and there's also some links that have been sent out, so you have to sign up for it.
Yeah, you do have to register for it.
Yeah, you have to
so that
register
you can
for it. So
Zoom.
again, that's on July 14th at 6 o'clock, and it is a virtual meeting, so look on our website. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll adjourn the study session.